Hi, my name's Caroline Partridge. I'm mum to Amber. She's 16 and she has got CDKL5 deficiency. The title of my talk is It Doesn't Just Affect Me, Understanding the Impact of Trauma, a Family Perspective. I am going to be looking down because I've got notes. I didn't want to do a PowerPoint presentation because I just wanted to really have a conversation. So I'm having a conversation from my perspective with you. So what is trauma? So trauma is an event or an ongoing experience that overwhelms the person's ability to cope. It includes helplessness and lack of support. It's a subjective experience, i.e. not about the event itself, but it's the way the particular person has experienced it at the time. And when I link that to being a parent of a child with a disability, I think about the time when Amber was she was 3 months old actually. She had her first seizure. I didn't really know what it was. It didn't really look like a seizure to me. Her arms and legs just went up very slowly, up and down. And it was probably, she did that a couple of times and it was just in her sleep. And I think looking back now, obviously 16 years, we didn't get her diagnosis of CDD until she was just before her 4th birthday. I can see how traumatized I was, and it's taken me a long, long time to actually realize that what I experienced in those early days was as a result of trauma and how that impacted on my mood, my ability to function, etc., etc. We often talk in being parents of children with disability about grief and loss, and some of you may have heard about chronic sorrow. Chronic sorrow is the concept that parents, people, it doesn't need to be parents of children with disabilities. It could be somebody that has had cancer, and it could be their loved one that's experiencing chronic sorrow, but it's a living loss. It's that experience of having somebody present, but the loss of something. So a lot of us with children with CDD will often talk about the fact that, milestones that aren't achieved, that, going to school with peers, going to the school prom, getting married, all of those things are a loss. And chronic sorrow looks at how we dip in and out of acceptance and denial, and it can be quite difficult. It can be quite difficult. A lot of people that I've spoken to and that I've seen on social media may have had a diagnosis of depression, and certainly clinical depression and trauma, experiencing trauma can have very similar symptoms, such as hopelessness, feeling helpless, feeling down, depressed, tearful, feeling that there's just no hope. And I think what we don't really understand is that actually all of those are really normal feelings. Trauma is actually, we experience it, but the way that we experience it in our bodies is actually from a physiological point of view, actually in the brain. And it's a limbic system within our brain that sends signals down through our vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is the biggest nerve in the body that actually controls all of our emotions. So, when we've had a child and we've seen a child with, having a frightened seizure, that impact that we get in our bodies, how we feel anxious and we feel our heart racing, the pit of the stomach feeling, that is actually a physiological state that we're in due to that, witnessing that seizure or whatever it might be. So there's lots of types of trauma. I'm a social worker, so from a social work perspective, we talk about primary trauma and developmental trauma. So that might be trauma that children may experience from neglect or physical injury or something like that. But also, you know, parents of children with disabilities, you know, we can suffer from primary trauma. It's shocking to see what we've seen, what we have to go through on a daily basis. And I think understanding that actually it is, you know, that is what it is, that is the reason why we feel like we feel, can help us through acceptance, I think, when I look at the grief cycle. And in a minute, I will talk a little bit about my own personal experience. There's another type of trauma which is really interesting, because I only learned about this last year at work as a social worker. I work with children in care in the foster system, and being a social worker is traumatic. You know, I see lots of things, hear lots of things, take on lots of other people's traumas, and actually that's called secondary trauma. In secondary trauma, you might not think that it's happening to people. So when, for example, we have a conversation with a friend and we might be saying, oh gosh, you know, Amber, she did this and she was shaking and the seizure was so bad. What we're actually doing is putting an image in somebody else's head. And what we don't always realise is that some people are so sensitive and they take that image, and that then causes secondary trauma, and that can be quite difficult for people to deal with. And I think, you know, even from my own perspective, I remember in the early days I used to get fed up with people looking at Amber, and she used to put her head down and people would say, oh, is she tired? No, she's having a seizure, I'd say. And actually that's quite a cruel thing to do, I think, but I used to get so fed up with it. And since learning about secondary trauma, that actually has made me think and stop that actually I need to be a bit more careful about what I say to people and how I say it. Because to us as families, you know, it becomes normalised. Unfortunately, it becomes normalised. It's not that we want it to become normalised, but it just is, because that's, you know, we're living it on a day-to-day basis. I think the other thing that I've noticed through social media, for example, is that, you know, some people, you know, we can share a lot. We can share a lot within our groups or on our public Facebook pages. And, you know, sometimes we can share graphic details and that then impacts on others as well. So I just really, you know, I wanted to talk about that really, because I don't think we always recognise it. And what I also see, just while I'm on the subject of social media, is that, you know, when we've got a young person or a child that's in hospital or has sadly died, is that, you know, I see from the training that I've received is that actually we have this community trauma. So by seeing what we've seen, we get the sadness, we get the fear that goes along with when you see somebody that's lost a child. You know, you do worry, you know, will that be my child next? And that has a huge impact, I think, on a community. So I just sort of want to have a quick chat about sort of my experience really in the last year. So as I already said, I'm a social worker, and I think it was January last year I had was working, and we had a baby that was terminal, that was poorly, and I had to go and support another social worker to the PICU to see this child, and we did that, and we went into the PICU, and I'd been in this particular PICU before, and the first thing that struck me was the bleeping of the machines. And you know, a lot of you will know that have had children in hospital. You know, they put the child on heart rate machines, sat monitors, etc., etc. And it was very silent in the PICU, as you know, what you'd expect. And really, the only noise was this the bleeping, really, the bleeping of the machine. And that day, me and my colleague, we had to actually sit down with parents, and little did we know there was a conversation that we really didn't want to be part of, but there it was. Anyway, we left the hospital. But what I was really surprised at is how that impacted on me, and I can still feel the impact on me today, 18 months later. And the thing that I keep going back to in my mind is the bleeping of those machines. And I think that, well, I know so, that actually had a trigger for me, and I was triggered into sort of post-traumatic stress. I was at work, I was emotional, I was really not understanding how I got to where I was at that point in time. I was coming home from work and I was sat crying just out of the blue, which is very unlike me. I'm quite an emotional person, for those that have seen me speak before, but I was just crying all the time. And I was going to have counselling. We went into lockdown. I ended up working through my feelings myself, and trying to understand what was happening. And I came to the conclusion, following doing trauma training, that actually what I'd suffered was a triggered event, and I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. There are a number of other things that I have flashbacks to. A couple of times I found Amber in a state where she's not been breathing, and I get flashbacks in my mind. I picture that quite often. But I think for me, what has really, really helped is through doing this trauma training is that I really started to understand my body, my brain, my vagus nerve, and how when I'm feeling stressed, the certain feelings that I have in my body, and the behaviours and what I do in terms of being at home, I can really tell when I'm starting to feel like that. And I think by recognising, for me, I tend to go to bed. I go into a state of they call it dorsal vagal. So shutting down, basically. I shut down and I have to go away for a period and recoup and de-stress, and actually think, I'm really lucky. I'm really, really lucky to have a beautiful girl and a beautiful family that I have. The other part of post-traumatic stress that I want to talk about is the impact on siblings. So the talk talks about the family perspective, and I've had permission from my son to talk about his story. And I think if I'd have asked him this time last year, could I talk about his story, he would have absolutely said no. But my son, he was 6 when Amber was born, and he was the doting big brother. Absolutely idolised her. Would often lie on the sofa, and he was only little himself, but he used to like her lying on his chest, and he was like a little daddy. That's men like to have babies lying on their chest. And when obviously she was 3 months old, she had her first seizure, which was really, really traumatic for him. He was only 6. His other brother, my other son, 6, 7, 8, was 8. And it meant that me and Amber had to go into hospital for quite a significant period of time whilst they did tests. And what I think we don't realise as parents necessarily is that when we're in this place of almost toxic stress, because it is stressful when you don't know what's wrong with your child and you're all of a sudden thrown into something that is, extraordinary, really extraordinary, is that we don't always communicate. We don't always communicate to siblings in a child-centred, child-friendly way. And what happens is that they are unable to make sense of what's happening. So for Cameron, he really struggled. He absolutely idolises Amber, worships the ground she walks on. But when he came into his teenage years, it was really difficult, and he's nearly 23 now. He went through a period of, generally what some young men do, experimenting with drugs, etc., etc. But it was really in the last 2 to 3 years, I think, that things got significantly worse in terms of his mental health. And after, much persuading to me, he did seek help from the community mental health team. And what was surprising to me is that through all of this, he was, young men don't like to talk, do they? There's a big campaign that men should start talking more. But he didn't like to talk, didn't want to talk to me about his feelings. But over the last few years, I've started to see sort of signs that he was struggling. So he would worry about me when I went away. So there's my advocacy within the CDKL5 community. I travel a lot. And he would always fear that something was going to happen to me, that I wouldn't come back. And I think that links to, his early childhood when, Amber was born, and there was long periods of time where I wasn't around, and he couldn't make sense of that. The other thing is that he kept going back to a point in time whereby Amber, she was doing this thing, periodic breathing, they call it, or almost like central apnea while she was asleep. So she would take 2 to 3 breaths, big breaths in while she was asleep, and then exhale, and then nothing for about 12 to 15 seconds. And what I didn't realise is that he thought she was flatlining, because I hadn't explained what that meant. He just thought, she's stopping breathing. He thought her heart was stopping. And he held that for a number of years that caused him significant stress. And the constant fear that one day she's not going to be here and that she's going to die. And, for a young man or a child to have to live with that, and for me as a parent, not actually recognising that it was how he was feeling was upsetting. I think that I didn't recognise it early, and that I wasn't able to see him through that trauma, because I am experiencing trauma. He was experiencing trauma, and it was just really difficult to find a way. So last year, he, as I said, he sought the services of the community mental health team. He has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and actually ADHD at the age of 22, and he is receiving medication, which has actually really, really improved him in terms of his rational thinking. And he's still got anxieties around Amber, but the thoughts and the impact on him is a lot less. And it's not unusual to hear that kind of story about living with siblings with CDD. I know a number of friends whose children, generally older, have experienced similar things. And it was really interesting that with June awareness, that people posting such profound things, which has been lovely to read. And I think the biggest thing is it's not just the impact on the child with CDD, but it's the impact on the siblings. And I just wanted to share that, really, because I just think it's something that we forget about, I think. And I think in order to have a well-rounded family, we need to talk more. We need to be able to share what's happening with our children in a way so that it doesn't cause them trauma. If they're listening to us, in another room, and we're talking about, you know, really adult themes about our children, then, you know, that can be difficult later on. And just, you know, the symptoms of trauma, for example, you know, what they are, PTSD, for example, you know, you re-experience a traumatic event, you know, the bleeping of the machine in the PICU. I was re-traumatized or experiencing the times that Amber was in hospital. I was also experiencing the times where I've been with other family members that have been in hospital. And like I said, you know, it can have a huge impact for Cameron. You know, it had problems with his concentration and his memory and significant sleep issues. And when you're, well, we know, don't we, parents? We know when we're sleep deprived, that can make everything so much worse. There is a therapy for PTSD, and I haven't tried it myself, but I feel that I need to pass it on whilst I'm talking about PTSD. And that's something called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what EMDR is a psychotherapy that enables people to heal from the symptoms and the emotional distress that are a result of disturbing life experiences. And repeated studies show that by using EMDR therapy, people can experience the benefits of psychotherapy that once used to take, you know, years and years to make a difference. But if you look up EMDR on the internet, you'll find that, you know, for some people with PTSD, you know, just one session can be life-changing. So I just, like I said, I've done a lot of training. I've got a lot of books. That seems to be what I spent my money on during lockdown, was trauma books. And I got this book. It's called, well, it's about polyvagal theory, which is the notion that the vagus nerve controls your emotion and the experiences that you feel when you're experiencing trauma or toxic stress. And in this book, the book is by a woman called Deb Dana. It talks about glimmer and glow. And I really like this. What a glimmer is, it's a micro moment of positive experience that help you stay regulated and ready for connection. So that's me. You know, I'm here, I'm ready to have a conversation with you because I want to have a conversation with you, and I want to connect with you because you look like a really fun person. If I'm traumatized or if I'm in toxic stress, I can't regulate. And actually, no offense, I don't want to talk to you. I just want to shut myself away. And for me, like I said, I want to go to bed and I just want to shut the world out. But what glimmers are is a micro moment that appears in everyday life and quite often goes unnoticed. We talk in the UK a lot about intensive interaction with our kids, and that is noticing the small things that they do. And it could be a small, you know, they might tap your hand, or they might give you a little look. And what I think is that that's what a micro moment for me is as well. You know, that is a little bit of a glimmer. And having children with CDD, you know, we don't always get back what we put in. And that can be demoralizing, it can be upsetting, it can be, you know, you can feel trauma because of your child is not engaging. But when we look for those little glimmers, and it might be in our child, it might be we're taking our child out for a walk, and a lady, you bump into a lady or a man, and they look at your child and they smile at them lovingly, and you know that your child has had an impact on somebody. It might be really small, but actually that's a micro moment to me. That's a happy moment, and that's a glimmer. And I think as we go along and we start tuning in to glimmers, little bits of interaction, what we can do is we can amplify it to a glow. And when we're feeling down, when we're feeling trauma triggered or we're in toxic stress, thinking back to those moments can really, really help. So today is, I'm actually recording this on the 17th. I'm a bit late, which should have been done a couple of weeks ago. But there was a really interesting post today, and what I want to do is to read it to you. And it's by Cheryl, and she's given me permission to read this. So I want to share it with you because I think what it does is it really gives a good example of how living with CDD, it is traumatic. It is not something that we wanted to do, but actually, you know, a lot of parents make the best of it. And I think what this post says to me is that Cheryl was really good at noticing the glimmers and amplifying things to a glow. So I'm going to read it to you. Today is CDKL5 Awareness Day. I'm very good at sharing all the amazing things that Hannah does and achieves out there on Facebook. All the perfect pictures and smiles. I don't tend to share the hard stuff. Why? Because it's not fun and smiley. It can be ugly and hard, as the other CDKL5 families will tell you. CDKL5 means having to do everything for your child, even though they are now 18 and technically an adult. That's everything from giving a drink, bath time, getting dressed, playing, moving. CDKL5 is exhausting, both for Hannah and for those caring for her. CDKL5 is consuming. CDKL5 means knowing what your child wants and how they feel because they can't speak to you. CDKL5 means she can't walk. CDKL5 means she can't use her hands fully. CDKL5 means never hearing, I love you. CDKL5 means lots of sleepless nights with night screaming, seizures, all-night parties, or just worry. CDKL5 means the trip is never easy. Everything needs planning, disabled toilets, food, access. CDKL5 is tiring, really bloody tiring. CDKL5 can be hours and hours or inconsolable crying with nothing you can do helping her. CDKL5 can mean self-injury. CDKL5 means tummy problems she can't describe. CDKL5 can be relentless seizures. Hannah's seizure on Tuesday was 24 minutes. Just try to comprehend watching your child do this. CDKL5 means you're not only a mother, but a therapist, a nurse, a secretary, chef, maid, an all-round problem solver. CDKL5 means you're never off duty. Nights out, date nights, holidays are rare and often cancelled. CDKL5 is watching friends lose their children. CDKL5 is hard. It's cruel and it impacts every part of life, but CDKL5 made us all fighters. I fight every day to make sure she gets what she wants. CDKL5 is friendships. We have met so many amazing people on this journey. CDKL5 is love, the love in her eyes as you help her. She's thankful. CDKL5 is headlock hugs, which are priceless. CDKL5 is laughter and joy in the smallest achievements. CDKL5 is an adventure and we're making the most of it even when it's hard. CDKL5 is, oh, now I'm getting emotional as I always do in these things. CDKL5 is our life. If I could, I would make life easier for Hannah. I would take the pain and the seizures. I would make the world an easier place to live with a disability. I would give her a voice light, her attitude, her smile, her hugs and her teeth kisses, because that's my Hannah. She may have CDKL5, but it doesn't have her. I love you, Lady H. Kiss, 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 kiss. And that is a really powerful thing that Cheryl wrote. To me, she does always post positive things on Facebook, but because I'm living with CDKL5, I know how hard it is, and we know how hard it is. But I think, sharing the positive side of disability can be really empowering for a parent. And what that poem, because I suppose it is a poem, says to me is that, despite all of this, despite all of the really, really bad stuff that Cheryl and her family, because I know that they have, is, they've come to a place in their lives where they are at acceptance. And actually Cheryl's story was the first story that I read when Amber was 2.5, and it was reading her story that led to me asking for the test, which ultimately diagnosed Amber with CDD. So I just want to leave it out there with you. We suffer from trauma. We can pass on our trauma. Our kids can suffer from trauma. It's not always depression. They do go hand in hand sometimes, and sometimes medication can help. I think, the more you learn about trauma, the more you learn about polyvagal therapy, and I can share those links with you. The more you will understand how you're feeling, how the physiological effect of living the life that we lead can actually help you in your everyday life. It will help you see the glimmer. It will help you amplify the glow. And the more that you can see those glimmers and have those glimmers in your mind to recall when you're in periods of stress, I think the more that it will help you settle into a life that's CDD. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been useful. You do have the ability to ask me questions. I'm always happy to share. I can be found on Facebook. My name is Caroline, or one word Partridge, or on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is CDKL5 Warrior. I just want to send lots of love to you all. Thank all the parents, all the children, all the carers, everybody that takes care of our children, from education to therapists. I want to thank all the scientists, all the medical professionals, and all the other organisations that are supporting us. We are a growing family, and we need to stick together. And if we can share experiences and talk about how we're feeling, I know it will make a positive difference. So thank you. Take care. Lots of love, and speak to you soon. Bye.